What if I told you that every anxious thought you've ever had has been built on a fundamental misunderstanding about reality? What if the very thing you've been fighting against is actually sustained by that resistance? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share a Buddhist truth that's over 2,000 years old. And when you truly understand it, anxiety fundamentally loses its grip on you. This isn't about positive thinking or breathing exercises. This is about something much deeper that changes how you relate to your own mind. So if you're tired of being held hostage by anxious thoughts, stay with me, because this might be the most important thing you hear today. Let me start by asking you something. When you experience anxiety, what are you actually anxious about? Take a moment and really think about it. Most people will say things like, I'm anxious about my job, about my relationship, about my health, about money, about what people think of me. But here's what the Buddha discovered over 2,000 years ago, and what neuroscience is now confirming. You're never actually anxious about the thing itself. You're anxious about your thoughts about the thing. You're anxious about the mental movie you're playing in your head, about what might happen, about what it would mean if it happened, about how you would handle it, about whether you'd survive it. The anxiety isn't coming from the external situation. It's coming from your relationship with your own thinking. And this is where most people get stuck, because we've been conditioned to believe that our thoughts are facts, that when the mind says something, we need to listen, analyze, figure it out, solve it. We treat thoughts like they're messengers, bringing us important information from reality. But what if they're not? What if thoughts are more like weather patterns in the mind, constantly arising and passing, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, but never actually the sky itself? In Buddhism, there's a concept called dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but that translation doesn't quite capture it. A better translation might be unsatisfactoriness, or the inherent tension that comes from trying to make permanent what is by nature impermanent. And here's the crucial insight. Dukkha isn't caused by external circumstances. It's caused by our resistance to reality as it is. It's caused by our constant grasping at what we want and pushing away what we don't want. It's caused by our desperate attempt to control things that are ultimately beyond our control. And anxiety? Anxiety is dukkha in its most recognizable form. It's the mind's way of trying to control the future by thinking about it enough, by worrying about it enough, by planning for every possible outcome. The anxious mind genuinely believes that if it can just think through every scenario, anticipate every problem, prepare for every disaster, then it can keep you safe. But here's what actually happens. The more you try to control your anxious thoughts, the stronger they become. The more you try to push them away, the more persistent they get. The more you try to solve them, the more problems they create. It's like being caught in quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. So what's the Buddhist truth that changes everything? It's this. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. Let that sink in for a moment. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise and pass away. This might sound simple, even obvious, but most people have never actually experienced this distinction. We're so identified with our thinking that we can't see the difference between the thought and the thinker, between the content of consciousness and consciousness itself. It's like watching a movie and forgetting you're sitting in a theater. You get so absorbed in the story, so caught up in the drama, that you forget there's a screen, there's a projector, there's you watching it all unfold. When you're anxious, you're not just having anxious thoughts, you've become the anxious thoughts. There's no separation. The thought says something bad is going to happen and you immediately believe it, you become it. You start living in that future scenario as if it's already real. But what the Buddha taught, and what you can experience directly for yourself, is that there's a dimension of your being that exists prior to thought, that isn't touched by thought, that can observe thought without being consumed by it. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. This sounds like spiritual bypassing, like I'm telling you to just ignore your problems or pretend everything is fine when it's not. That's not what I'm saying at all. This isn't about suppressing your anxiety or pretending it doesn't exist. This is about fundamentally changing your relationship with it. Because here's what happens when you really get this truth, when you really experience yourself as the awareness in which anxiety appears rather than as the anxiety itself. First, the anxiety doesn't feel as solid anymore. It doesn't feel like this monolithic thing that's taken over your entire being. It starts to feel more like weather, more like a temporary state that's passing through. You might still feel the sensations in your body, the racing heart, the tight chest, the churning stomach, but there's a spaciousness around it now. There's a you that's experiencing these sensations rather than being these sensations. And second, the thoughts lose their authority. When an anxious thought arises, instead of immediately believing it and getting swept up in the story, there's a moment of recognition. Oh, that's an anxious thought. That's the mind doing its anxious mind thing. The thought still appears, but it doesn't hook you the same way. It doesn't demand that you follow it down the rabbit hole. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say you have anxiety about public speaking. You have to give a presentation at work, and your mind is going crazy. What if I forget what I'm going to say? What if people think I'm stupid? What if I mess up and lose my job? What if everyone laughs at me? The typical approach is to try to control these thoughts. You might try to replace them with positive thoughts. You might try to rationalize them away. You might try to distract yourself or avoid the situation altogether. But none of these approaches address the fundamental issue, which is that you're identified with the thoughts. You think you are the person who's about to fail, who's about to be humiliated, who's about to lose everything. But if you can access this Buddhist truth, if you can remember that you are the awareness in which these thoughts appear, everything changes. The thoughts still arise. The anxious voice in your head might still say, "What if I mess up?" But now there's a you that hears that voice. There's a you that notices, "Oh, the anxiety is here." There's a you that can say, "I see you, anxiety. I hear what you're saying, but I don't have to believe you. I don't have to follow you. I don't have to become you." And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop fighting the anxiety, when you stop trying to make it go away, it loses its power. Not because you've defeated it, but because you've stopped feeding it with your resistance. This brings us to another key Buddhist concept, the idea of non-attachment. Now, non-attachment doesn't mean you don't care about things, or that you become cold and indifferent. It means you're not clinging to outcomes. You're not desperately grasping at how things should be. You're not in constant resistance to how things are. And when it comes to anxiety, non-attachment means you're not attached to being anxiety-free. You're not making your peace of mind dependent on the absence of anxious thoughts. Because here's what the anxious mind does. It creates a secondary layer of suffering on top of the primary anxiety. You're not just anxious about the presentation, you're anxious about being anxious. You're worried about your worry. You're afraid of your fear. You think there's something wrong with you for feeling this way. You judge yourself for not being able to just get over it. You compare yourself to other people who seem so confident and put together. And all of this creates more tension, more suffering, more anxiety. It's anxiety about anxiety, and it's often worse than the original anxiety itself. But when you understand that you are not your thoughts, when you can rest in the awareness that precedes and contains all thoughts, you stop fighting with your own mind. You stop making yourself wrong for feeling anxious. You stop trying to be someone you're not, and in that acceptance, in that allowing, something shifts. The Buddha taught that all suffering comes from our attempts to cling to pleasure and avoid pain, to make permanent what is impermanent, to control what is uncontrollable. And anxiety is the perfect example of this. We're trying to control the future through our thinking. We're trying to avoid potential pain by worrying about it in advance. We're trying to hold on to our sense of safety and security by anticipating every possible threat. But the future doesn't exist except as a concept in your mind. It's not real, it's not happening. It's never happening because when the future arrives, it's now. It's the present moment. And then the mind just projects into the next future moment. You can spend your entire life living in a future that never comes, missing the only moment you actually have, which is this one. And the irony is that by worrying about the future, you're actually creating the suffering you're trying to avoid. You're making yourself miserable now over something that might not even happen. And even if it does happen, you'll have suffered twice, once in anticipation and once in the actual experience. So how do you actually apply this Buddhist truth in your daily life? How do you move from understanding it intellectually to experiencing it directly? This is where practice comes in. The Buddha didn't just teach philosophy, he taught a practical method for training the mind. And the core of that method is meditation, but not meditation in the way most people think about it. You're not trying to clear your mind of all thoughts. You're not trying to achieve some blissed-out state of perfect peace. You're simply practicing observing your mind without getting caught up in it. You're practicing being the awareness rather than the content of awareness. You sit, you bring your attention to your breath or to the sensations in your body, and you watch what happens. Thoughts arise, emotions arise, sensations arise, and instead of following them, instead of getting lost in the story, you simply notice them. Oh, there's a thought about work. There's a feeling of anxiety in my chest. There's a tightness in my shoulders. You're not trying to change anything or fix anything. You're just observing. You're just being with what is. And here's what you discover through this practice. Thoughts come and go. They arise, they peak, they fade away. They're not solid. They're not permanent. They're not you. Even the most intense, most terrifying, most convincing thought eventually passes if you don't feed it with your attention and belief. This is radically different from how we normally relate to anxious thoughts. Usually, when an anxious thought appears, we immediately engage with it. We start analyzing it, arguing with it, trying to solve it, trying to make it go away. And all of that engagement gives the thought more energy, more reality, more power. It's like if you're walking through a forest and you hear a rustling in the bushes. If you focus all your attention on it, if you start imagining all the dangerous things it could be, if you start planning your escape route, that rustling becomes the most important thing in your world. It consumes your entire awareness. But if you simply notice, oh, there's a sound, and you keep walking, it stays as just a sound. It doesn't take over your entire experience. The same is true with anxious thoughts. When you can observe them without getting entangled in them, they remain as just thoughts. They don't become your reality. They don't define your experience. They don't control your life. And over time, with practice, you develop what Buddhists call equanimity, which is the ability to remain balanced and centered regardless of what's happening in your mind or in your external circumstances. You're not tossed around by every thought and feeling. You're not at the mercy of your mind's constant commentary. You're established in something deeper, something more stable, something that isn't touched by the changing conditions of life. Now, let's talk about what anxiety actually is from a Buddhist perspective. Anxiety is fundamentally a future-oriented state. You can't be anxious about this exact moment. You can only be anxious about what this moment might mean for the future, about what might happen next, about what the consequences might be. Even if you're in a genuinely threatening situation, the fear you feel is about what might happen in the next moment. It's anticipatory, it's about the future. And the future, again, doesn't exist except as a mental construct. The Buddha taught that most of our suffering comes from either dwelling in the past, reliving old hurts, replaying past mistakes, wishing things had been different, or projecting into the future, worrying about what might happen, trying to control outcomes, planning for every contingency. We miss the present moment, which is the only place where life actually happens, the only place where you have any real power. Because here's the thing, you can't control the future. You just can't. You can make plans, you can take actions, you can do your best, but you cannot control outcomes. There are too many variables, too many factors beyond your influence. And the anxiety that comes from trying to control the uncontrollable is futile. It's like trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you rest in the present moment, when you come back to what's actually happening right now, anxiety has nowhere to land. Because right now, in this moment, reading these words or listening to this video, you're okay. You're breathing, you're alive. Whatever you're anxious about isn't happening right now. It's a story about what might happen later. And that story is just thought. It's just mental content. It's not reality. This doesn't mean you become passive or that you don't take appropriate action to address challenges in your life. It means you stop torturing yourself with catastrophic thinking. You stop living in worst-case scenarios. You stop believing every scary story your mind tells you. You address what's actually in front of you, and you let go of everything else. This is what the Buddha meant by right effort. You put your energy where it can actually make a difference. In the present moment, in the actions you can take right now, and you stop wasting energy on things you can't control. There's a famous Buddhist parable about two monks walking by a river. They come across a woman who needs help crossing. One monk immediately picks her up and carries her across, then sets her down on the other side. The two monks continue walking, and after several hours, the second monk says, "I can't believe you picked up that woman. You know we're not supposed to touch women." And the first monk replies, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This is what we do with anxious thoughts. Something triggers the anxiety, and then we carry it with us for hours, days, weeks, years. We replay it, we ruminate on it, we keep it alive through our attention. But the situation that triggered it is over. The moment has passed. We're choosing to carry it, and we can choose to set it down. This is the power of awareness. This is the freedom that comes from realizing you are not your thoughts. You can observe the anxious thought, you can acknowledge it, and you can let it go. You don't have to pick it up and carry it with you. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to act on it. You can simply let it pass through like a cloud moving across the sky. Another important Buddhist teaching that relates to anxiety is the concept of impermanence or anicca. Everything is constantly changing. Nothing stays the same. Not your circumstances, not your thoughts, not your feelings, not your body, not your life situation. Everything is in flux. And this is actually good news when it comes to anxiety, because it means that whatever you're feeling right now, no matter how intense, no matter how overwhelming, it will change. This anxious state you're in is not permanent. It's not who you are. It's a temporary condition, a passing weather pattern in the mind. When you're in the grip of anxiety, it feels like it will last forever, like you'll always feel this way, like there's no way out. But that's just the anxiety talking. That's just another thought. The truth is that feelings arise and feelings pass. States of mind come and go. If you can just not interfere, if you can just allow the anxiety to be there without fighting it, without feeding it, without making it mean something terrible about you, it will naturally dissipate on its own. It has to. That's the nature of impermanence. Nothing sticks around forever. The problem is that we keep recreating the anxiety through our thinking, through our resistance, through our identification with it. We keep pouring fuel on the fire and then wondering why it won't go out. Here's something else the Buddha taught that's crucial for understanding anxiety, the concept of the second arrow. He said that when something painful happens, it's like being struck by an arrow. That's the first arrow, and it's unavoidable. Life involves pain sometimes. Things don't always go the way we want. We face challenges, losses, disappointments. That's the first arrow, and there's nothing wrong with you for experiencing it. But then we shoot ourselves with a second arrow by our reaction to the first arrow. We resist the pain. We judge ourselves for feeling it. We catastrophize about what it means. We worry about whether it will ever end. And this second arrow, the one we shoot ourselves with, often causes more suffering than the first arrow. With anxiety, the first arrow might be a genuinely stressful situation. Maybe you do have a difficult conversation coming up, or a challenging project at work, or a health concern that needs addressing. That's the first arrow, but then the second arrow is all the anxiety you pile on top of it. The worrying, the ruminating, the what-ifs, the catastrophizing, the self-judgment for not handling it better. And often, the second arrow is way more painful than the first. The situation might be manageable, but your thoughts about the situation become unbearable. When you understand this distinction, you can start to catch yourself shooting the second arrow. You can say, okay, this situation is challenging, that's the first arrow. But I don't have to make it worse by spiraling into anxiety. I don't have to shoot myself with the second arrow. I can just deal with what's actually in front of me without adding layers of mental suffering on top of it. The Buddha also taught about the nature of the self, or rather the lack of a fixed, permanent self. This is called anatta, or no self. Now this can be a challenging concept, but stay with me, because it's directly relevant to anxiety. We walk around with this sense that there's a solid, unchanging me that exists independently, a self that needs to be protected, defended, maintained. And a lot of anxiety comes from this sense of self feeling threatened. Anxiety about what people think of you is about protecting your self-image. Anxiety about failure is about protecting your sense of identity as someone capable or successful. Anxiety about the future is about protecting your sense of security and control. But what if this solid self is also just a thought construct? What if it's just another story the mind tells, another pattern of thinking that we've mistaken for reality? When you investigate your direct experience, where is this self? Can you find it? Is it in your body? Is it in your thoughts? Is it in your memories? The more you look, the more you find that there's just experience happening, awareness of experience, but no solid, separate, unchanging thing you can point to and say, that's me. There's just life living itself, consciousness experiencing itself, this ever-changing flow of sensations, perceptions, thoughts, feelings. And when you start to see through the illusion of the separate self, anxiety loses one of its primary anchors. Because if there's no fixed self to protect, what is there to be anxious about? This doesn't mean you become careless or reckless. It means you stop being so contracted around this imaginary entity that you think you are. You lighten up. You become more flexible. You realize that you can handle whatever comes because there's no fragile self that can be destroyed. There's just life, unfolding, moment by moment. Let's bring this back to something really practical. How do you use this Buddhist truth in the middle of an anxiety attack? When your heart is racing, when you can't breathe, when your mind is spinning with worst-case scenarios, how do you remember that you are not your thoughts? Here's a simple practice. First, stop trying to make the anxiety go away. This is counterintuitive, I know, but it's crucial. The moment you stop fighting the anxiety, the moment you stop resisting it, you break the cycle that keeps it going. Say to yourself, it's okay to feel anxious right now. I don't have to fix this. I don't have to make this go away. I can allow this to be here. Second, bring your attention to your direct, physical experience in this moment. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your breath moving in and out. Feel the sensations in your body, even the uncomfortable ones. Don't try to change them, just notice them. Oh, there's tightness in my chest. There's a fluttery feeling in my stomach. There's tension in my shoulders. You're moving out of your head, out of the story and into your direct experience. Third, notice your thoughts as thoughts. When the anxious thought arises, label it. That's a thought. That's the anxiety talking. That's the mind's fear story. You're creating some distance between the awareness that you are and the mental content that's appearing. You're remembering that you are not the thought. You are the one noticing the thought. And fourth, breathe. Not to make the anxiety go away, but just to anchor yourself in the present moment. This breath, this moment, right here, right now. You're not in the future, you're here. And here, in this moment, you're okay. You might not feel great, you might still feel anxious, but you're okay, you're breathing, you're alive, you're experiencing this, and it will pass. Everything passes. The more you practice this, the more automatic it becomes. You develop what's called mindfulness, which is just the capacity to be present with your experience without getting lost in it. You train your mind to observe rather than identify, to witness rather than become. And over time, you'll notice that anxiety still arises, probably because you're human, and you have a human nervous system that's wired to detect threats and prepare for danger. But it doesn't consume you the way it used to. It doesn't take you over. It doesn't convince you of its catastrophic stories. It arises, you notice it, you let it be, and it passes. And in between the episodes of anxiety, you start to experience something that might have felt impossible before. Peace. Not the absence of all difficulty or challenge, but a deep underlying sense of okayness, regardless of what's happening on the surface. A sense of being connected to something bigger than your individual thoughts and feelings, something that's always been here, always will be here, something that the Buddha called your true nature, your Buddha nature, the awareness that you fundamentally are. This is the Buddhist truth that makes anxiety lose its power. You are not your anxious thoughts. You are the spacious awareness in which those thoughts appear and disappear. And when you know this, not just intellectually but experientially, when you can actually rest in this awareness even when the mind is going crazy, anxiety doesn't have the same grip anymore. It becomes manageable, it becomes workable, it becomes just another part of the human experience, Not something wrong with you, not something you have to fix or eliminate, just another weather pattern in the vast sky of consciousness that you are. This is freedom, not freedom from anxiety necessarily, but freedom in the midst of anxiety. The capacity to be at peace even when your mind is not at peace. The ability to be okay even when everything feels not okay. This is what the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree 2,500 years ago, and it's just as true now as it was then. Your thoughts are not facts. Your feelings are not who you are. You are the awareness in which all of this arises, and that awareness has never been touched by any of it. It's always been whole, always been complete, always been at peace. You just forgot. You got so caught up in the story that you forgot you were the one watching the story. But you can remember, right now, in this moment, you can come back to what you truly are, which is not the anxiety, not the worry, not the fear. You are the space in which all of that appears. You are the sky, not the weather. And when you know this, really know this, anxiety loses its power. Not because it goes away, but because you finally understand what it is. Just thought, just sensation, just a temporary condition arising in the infinite space of awareness that you've always been and will always be. So the next time anxiety shows up, don't fight it. Don't try to fix it. Don't believe everything it tells you. Instead, get curious. Notice it. Oh, here's anxiety. Here's what it feels like in my body. Here are the thoughts it's generating. And then ask yourself the most important question. Who is aware of this anxiety? Who is noticing these thoughts? Who is experiencing these sensations? And in that asking, in that turning attention back on itself, you might catch a glimpse of what you really are. Not the anxiety, not the one who has anxiety, but the awareness itself, the consciousness in which all experience arises. And that, my friend, is where true peace lives, not in the absence of anxiety, but in the recognition of what you really are beyond all anxiety, beyond all thought, beyond all temporary states of mind. This is the Buddhist truth that changes everything. This is why anxiety loses its power when you really understand it. Because you finally see that it never had power over the real you. It only had power over the imaginary self you thought you were. And when that illusion starts to crack, when you begin to wake up to your true nature, everything shifts. Life doesn't necessarily become easier, but you become more capable of meeting whatever arises with grace, with presence, with an open heart. And that makes all the difference.